Hi guys, it's Akiba from CryptoSlate here. Today I have got Jonathan Allen, one of the main contributors from BitDao, with me. Hi Jonathan, how are you doing?
Doing well. Thanks so much for having me. How are you?
No, yeah, I'm not too bad at all. Say, I'm packing for Paris at the moment, so things are a little bit hectic, but it's all good. I'm really excited to be chatting to you about this because I've got some specific questions that may be a little bit different to what maybe you're being asked around BitDao at the moment because I've got some specific interest around DAOs and how they can be applied in general. But I'm obviously I'm aware of BitDao. I believe you're the second biggest DAO in the world. Is that correct?
Yeah, I mean, I try not to kind of focus too much on it. I think there's a lot of kind of movement in treasuries because treasuries are
Hmm.
constituted from different tokens. But so
Right.
we've,
Yeah.
we've been popping between kind of like first and second. But yeah.
Oh, right. Okay. You say you don't want to focus on it because sometimes you're first.
Yeah, when we're first, we'll focus on it.
Okay, I like it. I like it. So, I mean, the first question then really is kind of, so how have you managed to get to that size? Like, what's the journey been?
Yeah, so I mean, I think it was pretty interesting. Like, in general, it was kind of like the idea was to start a DAO. I mean, I think a lot of this was catalyzed by some of the Bybit co-founders who I think a lot of exchanges there's some incentive of like doing a layer one or doing kind of like other alignment when you get to like a large exchange kind of size.
Hmm.
But what happened with BitDAO is like, okay, why would you kind of constrain yourself to one layer one, or why would you kind of just focus on like kind of a singular ecosystem? Why not have the narrative be like, we want to support builders? So I think that was like extremely forward thinking. That obviously kind of conversation, the fundraise happened before I started working on BitDAO, before it was public. But it was raising quite a bit of capital. There's like hundreds of millions raised from like Peter Thiel and Founders Fund and Dragonfly and Pantera, other folks like that. There was also a $150 million MISO public sale that took place. And then I think something that's really interesting is that every day Bybit's contributing around like $1 to $3 million based on the volume that they do that day. So what equates to almost $1 billion per year. So it's pretty sizable amount of inflow. It's pretty sizable amount of kind of initial flow. So yeah, just in general, it's a large treasury that continues to grow every day.
That's amazing. So, I mean, what's the goal? What's the purpose of BitDAO other than just having a big treasury? I mean, what's the reasoning?
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, there's a lot of big treasuries in crypto, right? And I think that's the thing that got me most interested in BitDAO is like it's a treasury that actively wants to do things.
Hmm.
It's a kind of the core mandate that I mentioned is like supporting builders. And so, like, what is the expression of that? Like it can be token swaps, it can be partnerships. But I think what's kind of interesting about the model that seems to have like started to really kind of permeate the BitDAO ecosystem is this idea of like autonomous entities. So I guess for the mental model, you can think of them as like sub DAOs, where kind of the notion is that BitDAO, has a significant capital, has a ton of like community support and like aligned partners, but it's not necessarily the domain experts when it comes to not really the domain experts when it comes to like certain verticals. So
Hmm.
I think with like gaming, we were like, okay, gaming is a very interesting kind of area of focus that we'd like to focus on. So we're like, okay, let's basically connect with the best and brightest when it comes to gaming. Create a mandate for them, get engaged partners, and then fund them, and then just really let them run with it. Because BitDAO shouldn't be micromanaging kind of every decision. If you're managing billions of dollars in treasury and every $1 million, $5 million, $10 million thing has to be a full token vote, it's very inefficient. So basically, we're saying that like, hey, like gaming's an area of interest, so we did Game Seven. Education, something we very much want to support, so we did EduDAO. We think scalability is like a primary concern. So ZK DAO with ZK Sync, and so that's really the model that we're hoping enables for like fractal growth. So it's not just constrained to a single DAO making decisions. It should hopefully be hundreds of DAOs with domain expertise making those day-to-day decisions.
Yeah, I mean that is really interesting. You mentioned EduDAO because I was literally looking at that when I was sort of doing some research on the project, and it was really interesting. So that's on the you can go on because again with DAOs it's super transparent. We can go on the snapshot, and I can see there the token address that's put the proposal together, all the votes, how much they voted towards it, information about it. We can see that was started on the 9th of December, ended on the 16th of December. How many votes for and against? It was 100% yes for EduDAO by the looks of it. And
Yep.
it that to me, when we then compare, let's think of other voting systems and experiences that people have, such as say in the political world. It just for me feels very very night and day. Do you think that DAOs are only useful in the blockchain space?
I think like we're seeing applications in other places as well. Because really, I think it's just a governance system that's optimized for community participation. That you want more engagement, you want more kind of like thought from the general public. I think there's obviously still kind of like stakeholders, because at the end of the day, it's kind of one token, one vote. Hopefully it gets a little bit more nuanced than that, but not necessarily going to go down that avenue right now. But I
Hmm.
think it's just one token, one vote. Like if you have significant stake, like you have significant vote. Like if you have significant influence because you come up with a fantastic idea, like people listen and see, and all of a sudden it can actually take place. So I think there's like that open kind of permissive nature of it. It's quite interesting. And so I mean, you've had it for buying the Constitution. People have been talking about buying a golf course. Buying an NBA team, buying an NFL team, right? And so I think like it can be applied to a lot of things in the existing world.
Hmm.
You just have to kind of consider the trade-offs about like, would a centralized solution potentially be better? Or would you like to optimize for this? So same with blockchain. Blockchain is not kind of the end all be all for every single use case, just like DAOs aren't. But I think if
Hmm.
you're using DAOs for what they're best at, it's a fantastic structure.
It's really interesting. So, I think we might have Kevin in here as well. He's a little pirate avatar. Kevin's also one of the main contributors of BitDao, I believe. Is that correct?
Yeah, I can turn my video on, although the background is not very exciting.
I might be able to
Just
add you
gonna
into the. Yeah,
get it off.
let me add you in 1 second.
At least
So,
for being late. Family happens.
not a
Life
problem.
happens.
Not a problem. I'm just gonna duplicate this and get you in. I can always just duplicate. Let's do this. Ah!
We're not live, right?
We're not live as into the public. No, I'm just recording, so I will edit this if I need to. But it might be fun. Who knows? There we go. Now there's
Nice.
3 of us. There we go.
Is it helpful to do?
There you go.
I mean, no, that in all honesty, that just messed with my head. No, that's good.
Okay.
So Kevin, what's your role within BitDao?
So I am a marketing communications professional by trade, and so I'm working to help build the BitDao ecosystem full time as a member of Wind Ranger Labs.
Okay, brilliant. Where does the name Wind Ranger come from? Is it from Dota?
Yep.
No, let's
Yeah.
let it be a mystery.
I
It is not from copyrighted material.
Okay, of course, yes. I mean, I don't know. I mean, there's a huge argument as to who owns the copyright. I mean, you just call it Windrunner and then you're fine.
But yeah, I mean, I played Dota when I was a kid, like before it was Dota, when it was just Ice Frog on
Mhm.
like Dota All Stars and Warcraft. So I particularly like Dota, but we can, yeah. It's
I
not a
recently
bad thing
found.
if that evokes it.
Yeah, I recently found out that my editor's a Dota player, and we can we bonded over that and the new editor for CryptoSlate, so that was quite fun. So I mean, on
Great
going
together.
back onto sort of the topic here in terms of. You say that DAOs are good at what they're good at. So obviously we're seeing lots of implementation within the blockchain space. Do you think that they are the future of digital commerce in general? What's your sort of thoughts on that?
Yeah, I mean, it's a really good question. I mean, I think like it's really timely. We recently published kind of a blog post about like what DAOs can't do. And so it's like I think in this new kind of decentralized world where we imagine it's just like DAO to DAO business and like everything's on chain and everything's public and like like permissionless, like that's fantastic. And I think we're working our way toward that. But I think the current state of things is that a lot of these centralized processes, are very optimized for centralized companies and kind of like existing models. And so I think in the domain of, there's been a lot of excitement and like it's a very clear route to having like an investment DAO. And so if you want to invest in liquid tokens or NFTs or kind of like have like collectives to like bid on auctions, like that's all possible. But when you get into the realm of like private investments, there are a lot of constraints around what you can publicize. And so trying to work within the framework of if you're saying, hey, we have a public forum, we're going to post everything, we're going to have everybody vote on the full context, having that translate to kind of the realities of like, okay, you can't reveal this information. This can't be publicly circulated, like all the legal requirements around private investment, trying to work within those constraints and figure out like, okay, if we can't publicly circulate it, maybe there's a committee and maybe there's like a review process before? Like, what can we externalize? Like maybe like a synopsis of what somebody else reviewed then can be externalized. So like trying to find that balance between like having it be as trustless and like transparent as possible, but then also kind of focusing on the realities of kind of like how these things are structured. There's a bit of growing pains, but I think we're like figuring it out. It just takes people who are working in these DAOs being creative and coming up with processes to overcome that. So I think we're well on our way.
So you say that you wrote a blog post recently about what sort of DAOs can't do. So what would you say are the areas that, say, traditional organizations have a benefit over a DAO?
Yeah, so I mean, I think like private investments was one that was like highlighted. We're planning on kind of like unpacking some of that, just because with as many DAOs as we're spinning up, like we're constantly asking like what can't DAOs do, and continually hearing from the lawyers like here are all of the things, and then so we're like, okay, well, if we want to do that, how could we potentially do it, right? So I think
so is that they can't do it just because of current regulatory environments, though? Like, could those regulatory environments change through, say, I don't know, lobbying through DAOs? I mean, is that a hard stop?
It's one of those things where it's like the governance process of DAOs for a lot of DAOs. Like obviously there's a broad spectrum of like what a DAO looks like and how it operates, right? But for BitDao, for instance, if we want to get anything approved, there has to be a soft proposal that is on discourse, and it's just completely open to anyone with a link on the internet. Then it goes to a snapshot approval where everyone votes, and like the entire thing is public that everyone can see what's happening, like you just mentioned, for like Edgy DAO, correct? So it's like that doesn't work with the current kind of regulatory environment where it's like, oh, okay, like there's rules around if I'm raising a round and I want to raise $5 million at a certain valuation, I can't just like post it on my Twitter and be like, hey guys, I'm raising this amount of capital, like, because that's, you don't necessarily want investors who shouldn't be hearing about that opportunity. And I think it's like a great conversation of like, why are a lot of these deals like private? Like, why is there kind of like certain requirements for who can invest in what? And so I think like lowering those limits, like making it kind of like more accessible to the common person, not having these private deals, which have significant upside, available to like the everyday person, I think is like an endeavor worth putting effort into. So we'd love to see DAOs kind of like lobby for that, to have it be more transparent, for there to be less rules around private investments, because it's a great opportunity that, if you put time and effort into, it should be available. But I guess the counterpoint is like, also don't want people to kind of like lose money, and you want to protect investors. So balancing that, but I definitely think there's some conversation to be had there.
So you're talking about the US accredited investor sort of framework. It's like having over $1 million in assets and certain other criteria. Is that what you mean? That's too restrictive?
Yeah, I mean, I think to some extent. I mean, there's like been a call from a couple people to like lower that, but then there's also been calls to increase it, right? And so it's like I think it should probably go like the former, but yeah, I mean, we'll see how it goes. I think like in general, they're all over the world. There's different kind of restrictions for if you're raising capital from investors, like what do those rules look like? So I think like people are most familiar with the U.S. ones, but there's also similar ones in like Europe and Asia. Like there's a lot of rules if you're just like going to accept money in exchange for something, what that looks like and what you're allowed to reveal and how you're allowed to market it. So trying to follow that when you're this global DAO, it is a bit of a challenge.
Yeah, no, I completely see that. And Kevin, you say that you're obviously from a marketing communications background. So what difficulties do you see around helping kind of create the adoption for DAOs? Because it's something very new to a lot of people. A lot of people around the world, I think we're only at like 4% adoption of crypto in general. So where people don't understand what a blockchain is, how are you working to help actually explain what a DAO is, which is several levels deeper, isn't it?
Yeah, it's a great question. There's a lot of different angles to this. First, I think the rate of adoption of the DAO model or any sort of governance framework that's going to be on chain is going to be matched by the rate of adoption of digital assets. So when I explain what a DAO is to people, I say, in the 1970s, the LLC in the United States, which there are millions and millions of now in the United States, it didn't exist before then. This very common form of a legal pass-through entity that many people have for their own businesses did not exist. And so what we're talking about with the DAO is the next iteration of the firm, the company, the corporation. And it's best positioned than any other type of organization today to natively govern digital assets. And so this is where I think there's going to be a lot of interesting activity, like with what John was saying about how public DAOs that require radical transparency, make private investments that are beholden to disclosure rules and solicitation rules. The things that are going to be really interesting to watch, and why Constitution DAO was so fascinating to me, was because it is where it's on the borders of where DAOs meet the terrestrial world, where they interact with a world that was not built for them, that does not understand them, are where the most fireworks are going to fly, the sparks are going to fly, the interesting things are going to happen. There's going to be a lot of development internally within kind of the Web3 space to enable better DAO functionality, just basically, or inter-DAO functionality. But the real magic is going to be, how do you create a legal agreement with a DAO as a non-DAO participant? How does a DAO own a physical object, real estate, or something else? How does it make a private investment? Because in the world on chain, code is law, but off chain, law is law. And so how do you get a decentralized body of people with no neck to wring, so to speak, to relent to the laws of a jurisdiction that essentially, unless the DAO consents, don't really have control unless you start to go after individuals and the autonomous part kicks in. And so that you get this really tricky, very interesting path of evolution that we can't really predict where it's going to go, but it's going to be the most exciting thing to happen in the space, I think, for years to come. And it's the power of DAOs that we have seen over the past few years to fundraise faster than anyone else, to engage with digital assets better than any other type of organization, to enable different types of work. You know, the way this new type of firm is structured is far more permeable, almost organic in nature, than your traditional corporation, which has very rigid, fine lines. You sit in a box, you know, you need permission to get in. But BitDao, for example, if you own the Bit token, you're in. You vote. You have influence. You have say. You can, and if you disagree, you know, let's say that you can't effectuate the choice you wanted to make, you can simply leave. And you can move capital out into another organization that better fits your style, your ethos, your philosophy, or anything. This permeability and the transparency of enforcement of decisions that are effectuated on chain is massively different than your traditional corporation. So going back to your original question, I'll stop ranting, is the way I explain what a DAO is that it is, and this isn't my own quote, I've stolen from other people, but it is the firm, the corporation built for the age of the internet, and how it interacts with the off-chain world is going to be very exciting to watch.
Moving directly from there to an area that I'm really interested in at the moment, and I think you've already raised some really interesting points for me to go away and think about, is I published a piece for our Edge members today based on something that came up in a conversation with Guy from the YouTube channel Coin Bureau. I was talking to him the other week, and he said that he thinks that DAOs may be an existential threat for politicians. What do you think to that as a concept?
Yeah, I mean, I think like there's a lot of things that it potentially threatens. Because I think it's like, you know, as like Kevin mentioned, like the ability to like coordinate capital and get people kind of like feel like they're directly involved and to move very quickly. Because I think like, you know, you see in kind of like politics, it's a lot about the funds that are raised, right? And so I think if you could immediately say like, hey, this just happened, it upset a lot of people. But instead of doing some Kickstarter, you know, doing something or some rally like a month or two in advance that takes time to coordinate, it could be like, hey, we started a DAO. Here's the multi-sig. Send capital to this. And we're actually going to have a team of like 8, 10, 100 people who are going to use that capital for the next 1 to 2 years, try to effectuate change to support the people who donated. Like you literally just created 10 careers about people who are passionate, you know, or 10 or 100 careers of people who are passionate and like want to actually change. And then people that immediacy of being like, I'm angered by this. I don't like this politician. Here's enough capital. And so I do think there's like significant potential for that, because most like PACs, you know, and like all these other things take time to organize. And like, you know, the average day person doesn't have kind of, you know, access to that or really like engage with that. But if it's a DAO and a lot of people are holding cryptocurrency and can just send some ETH or stable coins, like that's quite interesting. So I think there's like a lot of potential for that for sure.
And I think, obviously, you guys are in the heart of it, so you know the kind of, you already said the things that you struggle with DAOs, and obviously what's what's easier to do through a DAO or more efficient to do through a DAO. In a world where, ignore the regulatory confinements, let's say that that's been dealt with, and we could now use DAOs within politics for actually governance of countries. What would you see as being some of the biggest problems, other than obviously simple things like, let's say simple, but obvious things like, say, around security? Okay, if everything's public, how do you do like national security if it's all on chain? Like, aside from say that, what else do you think would be the most difficult parts of trying to say run a country through a DAO?
Galvanizing plutocracy, is probably not great. I mean, there already is a lot of money in politics, and if it was so direct that simply stake means influence.
No, but what if it was one? What if it was one token, one vote? Every citizen got one token.
Yeah, when you're working with essentially a framework that can enable identity, I think first of all, you're probably not talking about a public chain, because the ability for things like things that are it's some layer above it. The immutability aspect, I don't know, is it's something we would need to explore to have it be part of a country governance framework. But certainly, like the aspects of transparent voting, and having those decisions be immutable and accessible is very attractive to a voter base that wants to hold their representatives accountable. We don't have to have wholesale adoption of every single aspect of blockchain as we know it and apply it to every single other application. There's a variety of things that are attractive about this technology that you can cherry pick to make different situations better. So I don't think it's outside of the realm of possibilities to use immutable ledgers, to use cryptographic proofs to verify voting, tamper-proof elections, like to have it be pure, like democratic representation of votes, like removing the idea of representatives in the first place. I don't know if that's reasonable, because think of the complexity of government. Think of the complexity of the things that are going on, and you would now be required to make informed decisions on these things all the time. There's this idea of the death of the expert. There are people who know more than other people about certain things. And so we should also remain in a framework that allows us to elevate experts who have demonstrated they can help drive certain things in government or elsewhere. So I don't know. It's a very interesting thing. I think parts can be applied.
Well, I was gonna say really quick to tack onto that too. It's like I feel like DAOs are almost like speed running, like all the different governance systems. Like I think there's like a lot of parallels with like corporate governance, where there's lessons to be learned, and I also think from like country, like the governance of countries as well, right? And so it's like, you're basically talking about like direct democracy, and so it's like, okay, let's look through history why we haven't necessarily had that, right? And so I think it's just understanding like what's, on a small scale, we can see like participation rates are quite low, like power laws kind of still control, where it's like you have a minority doing kind of the most, and getting people incentivized, I think, is something where it's like, if you have these Web3 tools that allow easy participation and even reward participation, can you improve upon that? But I think a lot of the current kind of political issues of people just not voting, and just like not really paying attention to the issues, some of those still exist in DAO communities. And so it's like, how can we, affect change, and how can we use these new tools to make that easier and more accessible to the average person? So it's been quite interesting to see like a ton of parallels, tons of lessons to be learned. Like, history is definitely something to study if you're quite into DAOs.
I mean, it's all just a thought experiment, like you say, and I think you raised some really great points there, Kevin, around like you don't have to make everything blockchain just because you can. Like, it's the right thing, and especially around the idea of kind of experts and the death of the expert. I think it's really interesting. But in a world where we were to explore the idea of kind of politics through DAOs, do you feel, and you talk about participation, I mean, could you see a world where through a DAO you then release a CDBC which is controlled by the DAO, and that is maybe a reward token for voting. So you're actually then paying the citizens in order to vote. Is that something that you've used in a new way?
Lots to unpack there.
So DAO the world and then use it as a funnel for UBI. Is basically what you're saying. Yeah. I mean, I think it's one of those things where like the more complex you make these systems and the more you apply it, like we're still figuring this out on a small scale. And so like if you want to like pitch like the dream of like what's possible in like 5, 10, 20 years, like, you know, sure, it's an interesting thought experiment. Like anything's possible on paper, but like where do I see it like lending itself? It's like I don't necessarily see it as kind of like a DAO is the most efficient way to get things done at scale. I think it's a way of basically like, you know, democratizing kind of like access to communities. And for like bigger things like gaming, right? It's like, okay, like we want input from people about how like games should be developed and like what games they enjoy playing and like what should be the mechanics within that. But I think when you're talking about like a country level where you're making these very nuanced decisions that like are affecting lives, like that's something I'd like to see the model play out significantly more before, you know, I start being like, okay, this could potentially be someone's livelihood, right? Or this could potentially be like, you know, significant effect to the economy. I don't necessarily think we're at the state where, okay, cool, let's have everybody vote on kind of that stuff.
I mean, there's no way we're there yet. I'm just interested to sort of speak to experts in the field that are living it day to day, and just bring up some of the thought experiments that sort of people in the community and say other people have been kind of speaking to me about recently. Like, it seems to be an interest in, obviously, global politics at the moment is in a very difficult place. There's countries that are struggling with the concept of voting, and then obviously Cardano have been doing a lot sort of in Africa, looking into how they can improve with that. And I was thinking, could DAOs add an element to it? And you're basically saying maybe, but from your experience of being in it, we're a long way off.
I think, like, to maybe clarify, it's like I think there's a lot that can be done. I think when you talk about like, okay, let's onboard everybody and have it be a funnel for UBI and decide all the rules and the policies and direct democracy, like I just see the issues abound, right? You know, but I think you're saying like, hey, I see one of the main problems right now is money, and the undue kind of influence of like large corporations or people with significant capital being to influence these things significantly. And you're saying, hey, we could start a DAO to say, hey, I want to, you know, affect this change or, you know, have this kind of like happen. And people like agree with that and can contribute to it and fund other people who want to like help run that DAO and like enable that single use case. That's quite interesting. And I think like money is one of the biggest problems, and DAOs are extremely good at getting people engaged, at raising capital, and being focused on kind of like a very structured, kind of straightforward mission. So I think that could be spun up very easily like today. I think like the more nuance and complexity you add to it, like the more thought that needs to be put into the structuring, how governance works, how things can iterate and change and not be kind of like static and set in place. And so yeah, I guess that's to kind of clarify that point.
To add on to that, yeah, I agree that having it be like the overarching governance structure is probably just it's difficult to fathom, but having it having pieces of it apply to different kind of areas of interest in politics of like identity, property, you know, voting, things like that, using it to strengthen the integrity of those systems, I think is awesome. But just to go off the point John was making with money and politics, like how do you start a super PAC? I don't know. Do you? I know how to start a DAO. And so that is a way to create community-driven momentum, to organize capital, and to equitably distribute governance over that capital that can then be used in the same way capital is being used to influence politics today and lobbying. You know, this vehicle levels the playing field, where specialized, highly regulated black box ways of getting things done in how decisions are made at the highest levels in politics have traditionally kept people out. It's been know-how and money and the ability to organize over great distances. You know, the age of the internet has enabled information to be widely consumed and now and organized, and now we are enabling capital to be widely localized and organized at scale. That's a huge leg up. And so DAOs automatically bring new types of competition to traditional systems that are essentially designed now to be exclusive.
So well said. That's really interesting. And I think, yeah, the fact that you're saying that, yeah, again, from your experience of being in there, it can get very complicated very quickly, is kind of what it sounds like you're sort of saying in terms of the governance, and being able to apply it to different areas. And I mean, the idea of being able to create a DAO super PAC to help. Yeah, that's really, really interesting. There's a lot to say. You've said it a few times, but there's a lot to unpack there in terms of where you're coming at it from, sort of inside. So, I mean, one of the questions that I had, no worries, we'll be wrapping up now anyway, is I'm guessing you're probably agreeing that DAOs aren't really ready for mass adoption at this point, or would you disagree with that? Because obviously you've talked about different ways that they can be done.
Yeah, I mean, I think like maybe take a first stab at that. Like, I think they are ready for mass adoption, but it just depends on for what. I think if it's like, hey, let's buy the Constitution, definitely. Like, it's an amazing platform for that, and like you just saw kind of like the ability to do that. Like, unfortunately, they didn't win, right? But I think the ability to like coordinate capital toward this singular focus is definitely ready for prime time. I think where it's talking about, okay, we want this DAO to last for decades, and we want it to be this kind of like everlasting entity that can kind of like move and shift and like, change and like deal with a lot of this kind of like unknowns. That's where it's not necessarily ready for like prime time, I think, where people are actively building it toward that. You can't necessarily just hop in and be like, okay, here's this full stack of DAO tools. Like, we're still building a lot of those tools. I think we're still realizing like what tools that we need and that like what mandates and the kind of like DAO focus that we applied to. And then I also think we're figuring out like the entity structure versus the governance structure, like what that looks like. And so like, what are some of the constraints that, I talked about earlier of like, what can't DAOs do? And if they want to do these certain things, how would you structure it? And so I think the groundwork is definitely being laid to have this be like ready for like a broad spectrum of things. But I think right now it's like, if you can narrow the scope, if you can have it be like, a smaller focus, it's very easy. I think like as you get kind of have it last longer and kind of like have to shift leadership and have it last like 6-12 months and have a variety of different things it wants to do, it gets more and more complex.
Fantastic. Well,
if I can add
a go for it.
thought too. I agree with everything John said, and just to shamelessly plug BitDao, I think that it's a tremendous opportunity that we have with BitDao being this rather agnostic behemoth of localized capital. So one of the things I say about BitDao all the time is that it's special because it doesn't specialize. Whereas DAOs of comparable size, they have a particular use case, protocol, product that they're going to focus on. Whereas BitDao is the treasury of Web3. It's really going wherever builders are looking to solve the types of problems that we talked about on this in this discussion. That's where BitDao wants to go. Across industries, art, entertainment, finance, technology, you name it, and creating this massive inter-DAO to DAO ecosystem that's all governed by the Bit token and can expand outward at this fractal rate that we talk about. I think we're not even sure what that's going to look like in 10 years, but we certainly have the foundation laid to make significant strides and support the people that are making the discoveries that will enable that mass adoption type event to occur, which I think will take a while because we've sort of forgotten about like some of the basic problems, like private keys are really scary for the average person. A password you forget and you're screwed. So, a lot to figure out. But for DAO governance, I think BitDao is going to be a huge proponent of propelling it forward in the next 10 years and beyond.
Fantastic. All right, John, I know you need to get off, so we'll leave it there. But it's been fantastic speaking to you both, and all the best with BitDao in the future.
Yeah, thanks so much for having us. Great
Thank you very much.